Hello and welcome to episode 203 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. This is the last episode of the podcast before Hanukkah and Christmas on December 25th. So I would like to wish everyone who observes either of those holidays a safe and happy celebration. We also focus on inclusion, so I don't want to leave anyone out with different beliefs, practices, or customs. Let's all enjoy the holiday season. On the show today, I will be doing another episode where I go in depth into the tenure of former Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner. In November, we looked at one of his biggest failures, the proposed theme park in Northern Virginia, which was to be known as Disney's America. Today, we're going to flip the script a little bit and look at what might have been the biggest success of the Eisner era, the 1988 movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that we're in the middle of Vlogmas. Each and every day of December, I'll have either a video, vlog, or podcast on the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. I had tried this in 2022 and 2023 as well, and last year it really helped us gain subscribers. It's been slower growth on the subscriber front this year, but we are still moving in the right direction. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so right now. If you are subscribed, it never hurts to like our videos and podcasts while also leaving positive comments. Just this past week, I posted vlogs from the Orlando Informer meetup at Universal Orlando Resort, holiday decorations from Disney's Wilderness Lodge Resort, and this upcoming weekend will be offerings from Epcot's International Festival of the Holidays. There has also been some pretty interesting news coming out of the theme park world, and there are some important dates on the horizon. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in Magic Kingdom is set to close down for refurbishment on January 6th, making Sunday the 5th the last day to ride it until the scheduled reopening in 2026. Disney has also been pretty quiet about when they will start the construction involved in turning Tom Sawyer Island and the Rivers of America into the new Cars section of Frontierland. It is very possible that the next 2 weeks will be your last chance to ride Big Thunder with the familiar views of the water. My friend Jillian and I are currently planning on paying our respects to one of the best rides on Walt Disney World property the last weekend of operation, and hopefully we'll be able to follow through on that. Of course, over at Disney's Animal Kingdom, Dino Land USA is going to be replaced over the next few years with a Tropical America's Land. Eventually, there will be a carousel with wooden carvings of different Disney animal characters, an Encanto attraction, and Dinosaur will be getting a re-theme to Indiana Jones. The Indiana Jones attraction is expected to be slightly different from the one in Disneyland and have a unique character specifically relevant to Animal Kingdom. If you're looking to enjoy Dinosaur one last time, you will have all of 2025. Disney will be keeping that attraction until 2026. If, however, you are a fan of Triceratops Spin in the Chester and Hester section of Dino Land USA, you will not be so lucky. That entire area is going to be behind construction walls starting on January 13th, making Sunday the 12th the last day to experience the attraction. Another change coming to Disney's Animal Kingdom will be taking place right on Discovery Island. It's Tough to Be a Bug is the current 3D show inside the Tree of Life. By the end of 2025, it will be completely replaced with Zootopia, Better Zoogether. While I know a lot of people who really love the original theming at Animal Kingdom are upset that Zootopia is coming to a park where it really doesn't fit, I think a lot of people are also relieved that it won't be getting its own land at DAK. So I think this is a change that we're just going to have to chalk up to, well, it could have been worse. Apparently, construction is moving along well for Test Track 3.0 in Epcot. I was just able to take a look at the progress on the outside of the building this past Sunday, and there is still a lot of construction equipment to be seen. Disney, however, is confident that the refurbishment won't take too long and recently announced a summer of 2025 reopening date. The first version of Test Track was designed for guests to experience the testing of GM vehicles through the perspective of crash test dummies. The rethemed Test Track 2.0 didn't come with the official moniker of the Tron franchise, but the ride was made much darker and resembled the Tron aesthetic. This new retheme is supposed to be more of an homage to World of Motion, which was the original attraction to occupy that section of Epcot. Epcot is also winding down the International Festival of the Holidays in preparation for the Festival of the Arts, which will run from January 17th through February 24th. The festival features the Disney on Broadway concert series. There are a lot of extremely popular and talented performers scheduled for this year, but I'm particularly excited for Michael James Scott, who plays the genie in Aladdin, and Kissy Simmons from The Lion King. They will be performing together on the American Gardens Theater stage on February 14th, 16th, 17th, 20th, 23rd, and 24th. Since Festival of the Holidays and Festival of the Arts are both so short, we also got some information on Epcot's International Flower and Garden Festival. This festival runs from March 5th until June 2nd. The first month of performers have been announced for the Garden Rocks concert series at American Gardens Theater. On March 7th and 8th, you can see Tommy DiCarlo, the former lead singer of Boston, followed by Air Supply on the 9th and 10th. Blue October will be there on the 14th and 15th. Rick Springfield the 16th and 17th. And Herman's Hermits starring Peter Noon on the 21st and 22nd. The month will end with 38 Special on the 23rd and 24th. And Jason Scheff, the longtime singer of Chicago, on the 28th and 29th. Dates without a national act will feature cover bands performing on the stage, and you don't want to miss these cover bands. Some of them are quite amazing. I have really enjoyed just sitting and watching. I know they had a soul R&B act that was there last year, or this past year, I should say, and they just blew the roof off the place. They were so incredibly talented, and yes, the national acts get all the attention, but don't sleep on some of those cover acts. On to Disney Plus, where a new Pixar original animated series titled Win or Lose is set to premiere on February 19th. Will Forte of Saturday Night Live fame will be the starring voice of the series, playing Coach Dan. The show follows a middle school co-ed softball team and was originally planned to feature a transgender character. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the character will still be a part of the show. However, Disney removed dialogue that would address the character being transgender. A spokesperson from Disney told The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "When it comes to animated content for a younger audience, we recognize that many parents would prefer to discuss certain topics with their children on their own terms and timeline." Honestly, this is a cowardly and pathetic decision by Disney. Transgender kids aren't topics to be discussed. They're just kids like any cisgender kids. This would have been an awesome opportunity to share a transgender child who was just living their life and playing sports. Think of how this character may have helped make a child feel a little more secure, and how this show would actually give families the chance to have these discussions. I know it's a completely different topic, but I remember when I was a kid and Sesame Street dealt with the death of Mr. Hooper, and it wasn't necessarily comfortable, but every family knows somebody who's going to die, and I'm going to tell you something. Every family knows somebody who's transgender. You might not know it firsthand, but you do know somebody who is transgender. This would have been a fantastic opportunity to create some inclusion, but instead Disney went with the divisive angle one more time. Disney seems to be moving in two counterproductive directions. They're opening new DVC resorts that cater exclusively to an upper-class clientele, and they introduce full-day skip-the-line passes that cost upwards of $400 per person to continue to cater your product to a wealthier customer base while pandering to the lowest common denominator on some of those social issues is ridiculous. Bob Iger is trying to cast too wide of a net for the current climate in the United States. The fact is, there's more money and a stronger potential customer base in California, New York, and Massachusetts than there is in Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. Now, let's change topics to something a little bit happier. We've talked a lot about former Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner over the past few months. While his tenure with the company ended with a lot of controversy, he was directly responsible for a lot of the decisions that led to the, quote, Disney Renaissance, or as he called it, the Disney decade of the 1990s. In past episodes, we talked about him working with President and COO Frank Wells to raise theme park prices, build more on-property resorts, and start selling home videos and creating the Disney Vault. All of these factors, combined with Eisner's singles and doubles strategy of making low-cost and high-reward movies, gave Disney the money to do incredible things throughout the 90s. None of it would have mattered if the movies weren't good, however. While The Little Mermaid marked the beginning of the Disney Renaissance, the success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit created the bedrock. The movie was released under Touchstone Pictures. Touchstone was created under the leadership of then Disney CEO Ron Miller, Michael Eisner's predecessor. The offshoot was intended to give Disney an outlet to release movies with more mature themes. That's why it was the perfect fit for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Loosely based on Gary K. Wolfe's book Who Censored Roger Rabbit, Eisner felt some of the blue humor, some of which was overtly sexual, would not work with the Walt Disney Pictures label. I was 7 years old when this movie was released on June 22nd of 1988. Personally, I think the greatest decision made during production was to keep the movie a little risque. There were obviously jokes that went completely over the heads of many young children, while providing some subversive, secretive humor for the parents watching. But when you were an 8-year-old and you did pick up on the jokes, it felt like you were getting away with something. You felt like just a little naughty. None of the Disney Renaissance was this dirty, but the template was set. Robin Williams in Aladdin, Eddie Murphy in Mulan, and James Woods in Hercules provided comedy that was more focused at times on the adults who were watching than the kids. I'm assuming that most of you know the main plot. Roger Rabbit is a suspect in the murder of Marvin Acme, who owns both Acme Corporation and Toontown. Judge Doom, played by Christopher Lloyd, and his weasels try to find Roger Rabbit and arrest him. R.K. Maroon, who owns Maroon Cartoon Studios, in an attempt to clear Roger's name, enlists the services of toon-hating private detective Eddie Valiant, played by Bob Hoskins. The real strength of the story, however, is the historical backdrop taking place in 1947 Los Angeles. This movie introduces some fairly deep topics in a way that kids can comprehend. Obviously, the Toons and Toontown in general are stand-ins for the black community of Los Angeles. In the post-World War II years, black families from the South were moving to Los Angeles in droves. Between 1940 and 1970, the black population of Los Angeles grew from 63,700 to 763,000. It was a time known as the Second Great Migration. Despite leaving the segregated South, however, black residents were met with a lot of challenges in the City of Angels. Many private deeds forbade property owners from selling to anyone who wasn't white. This led to certain areas of the city being extremely segregated and black neighborhoods sprouting up throughout the region. White flight from the inner city meant that South Central, Watts, and Compton all became predominantly black areas. Very early in the film, director Robert Zemeckis lays out this concept, but never pushes it too hard. You see the live action characters holding all the positions of power. Even though Roger Rabbit is a big star in cartoons, he doesn't have the power of Marvin Acme, for example. Jessica Rabbit, Roger's wife, even feels obliged to play patty cake, quote unquote, with Acme because they rely on him for their well-being. When Valiant first sees Jessica Rabbit perform in the nightclub, this separation is stark. All of the performers and servers are toons, and all of the patrons are live-action white men. Valiant flirts with Betty Boop, who was based on a black woman before being whitewashed over the decades. At the risk of any spoilers, we find out that Judge Doom is a toon who turned bad. He was responsible for the murder of Acme, and he had a sinister motive. Since Marvin Acme owned Toontown, his death would allow Doom to dismantle the Cloverleaf Trolley public transportation system and build a system of freeways over the land that was Toontown. This is exactly what happened in many American cities in the 1950s and 60s. The freeway systems were built to completely bypass Black and Hispanic communities. The subsequent reduction in public transportation left these minority neighborhoods in a disadvantageous position. White people were not blocked by deed restrictions from buying homes in the suburbs. The freeways were built with the express purpose of transporting workers from the suburbs into the city. This is just one of the systemic factors that impacts wealth disparity in Los Angeles specifically and in major cities in general. Keep in mind, this was marketed as a kids' movie, but it contained some adult humor, complex themes, and 3 different layers in the plot. The success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit should teach modern-day Disney that you don't have to talk down to your audience. Just take the example from earlier in our news segment. Disney Plus won't put a transgender character in a show about middle school kids because they think the fact that transgender people exist is too complicated for some parents to handle with their kids. Meanwhile, Michael Eisner was cool with putting an allegory for redlining in post-war urban regions out there. As kids, we understood the parallels. It did not go over our heads. As we now turn our attention to the technology, it's important to remember that nothing can replace a good story. The most important thing about Who Framed Roger Rabbit is that the script worked on so many different levels. You understood Eddie Valiant. He was a well-developed character, and you knew his initial hatred of Toons was wrong, but you had empathy for what he went through to cloud his judgment. You went from being very distrusting of Jessica Rabbit to realizing that she truly was on Roger's side. While it was obvious, even to me at the age of 8, that Judge Doom was a villain from the start of the movie, the plot twist was done perfectly by Christopher Lloyd. You always knew he was the bad guy, but you didn't exactly know how. If all of that wasn't there, if any of it was missing, it wouldn't matter how good the movie looked. All of that being said, this movie looked absolutely fantastic. Mixing live action and animation had happened before, even in Disney movies. The regrettable Song of the South was revolutionary as a technological work, even though the story was problematic. Of course, Mary Poppins was another huge leap forward, with Mary, Bert, and the Banks children jumping into the chalk drawings, pun intended. Who Framed Roger Rabbit went to the next level. The animators worked on shadows and lighting. Charles Fleischer, the voice of Roger, was actually on set to act with the live-action actors. He would even wear a costume. My favorite expression to come out of this movie, however, is bumping the lamp. This refers to a scene in a back room. Eddie Valiant has to physically move Roger to another part of the room. It was not enough for Eddie to just grab Roger and move him. Instead, Roger hits his head on a lamp in the room. First of all, this meant that the lamp had to be shaken at the right time during filming. It also meant that the animation had to be perfect to make the collision with the lamp look realistic, and that the animators would have to adjust the shadows in the room frame by frame because the lamp would be wobbling for a few seconds and changing the light patterns in the enclosed space. This is one little action that took days of work and cost thousands of dollars. My guess is that almost nobody noticed how unnecessary that bump was to the plot of the film, but it was an attention to detail that you picked up on almost subliminally. Michael Eisner liked to save money for sure, but it was that attention to detail that really was a hallmark of his time in charge of the company. These were the types of things that always amazed me when I would go to the parks. The details were just as prevalent in the movies of that era. Examples can be seen in almost every scene that has a toon interacting with a live-action actor. When Donald Duck and Daffy Duck were playing piano in the club, it could have been filmed in a way that you didn't see the keys. They didn't have to show the octopus bartender holding a physical item at the end of every tentacle. Saving money on these things would have been possible, but the movie would have looked worse. Most people watching it wouldn't have even been able to tell why, but it would show after a long enough time. The last example of this I'm going to use is the scene where Roger is in Eddie's apartment. The two are handcuffed together when the weasels come to search for Roger. Eddie pretends to be washing the dishes, so he keeps holding Roger down under the water. When the weasels look away, Roger springs out from the sink, spits out water, and gets dunked back immediately to keep him hidden. It's hilarious. Bob Hoskins plays it perfectly. The animation is flawless. The water effects are on point. It's amazing that Bob Hoskins didn't get the proper amount of credit for his performance. He wasn't a household name, and Disney really wanted a household name to play the role. Harrison Ford, Chevy Chase, Eddie Murphy, Robin Williams, Ed Harris, Jack Nicholson, Sylvester Stallone, and Charles Grodin were among those approached or considered for the role of Eddie Valiant. Bill Murray's eccentric means of collecting messages meant that he didn't hear about his offer until it was too late. Murray reportedly was upset to miss out on the chance. Personally, I think we dodged a bullet in all cases. Even with how much I love Bill Murray, Robin Williams, and Eddie Murphy, this part was meant to be played dry. The other names had personalities that would have dominated the scenes. There was already enough happening in every frame. You don't need Robin Williams mugging for the camera like it's the video for Don't Worry, Be Happy. When it came to Judge Doom, some other actors were also considered. Tim Curry was actually thought to be too scary in his portrayal. Christopher Lee, John Cleese, Peter O'Toole, and even Sting were all on the short list. Director Robert Zemeckis, however, was in the middle of working with Christopher Lloyd during the Back to the Future trilogy, and Lloyd really brought a subdued intensity to the villain. As a matter of fact, this was in the middle of a legendary run for Zemeckis. 1984's Romancing the Stone led into Back to the Future in 85, Who Framed Roger Rabbit in 88, Back to the Future 2 and 3 were filmed almost simultaneously to allow for 89 and 90 release dates. He followed that stretch with Death Becomes Her and Trespass in 1992 before closing it out with Forrest Gump in 94. Despite going drastically over budget at almost $51 million, the movie ended up earning over $300 million more than that initial budget. Roger Rabbit became a phenomenon. I started going to the parks in the mid-'80s, and my family stopped going for a stretch after 1993. If you weren't there at the time, it would be hard to explain how much Roger Rabbit dominated the landscape at Walt Disney World in the late 80s and early 90s. Roger starred in parades, and he made an appearance in almost every stage show. He was on merchandise. Roger Rabbit even featured prominently in the 1988 special to celebrate Mickey Mouse's 60th birthday. Imagineering initially created Mickey's Toontown in Disneyland to be a version of the Toontown from the film. To this day, Roger Rabbit's cartoon Spin, in which guests are able to ride Benny the Cab, is the only ride of the movie in a Disney theme park. In 1989, a planned movie pavilion in Epcot eventually turned into an entire theme park when Michael Eisner wanted to beat Universal Studios Florida to the punch. Disney-MGM Studios opened on May 1st of that year, and Eisner called it a tribute to, quote, the Hollywood that never was and always will be. Roger Rabbit was the hottest movie property in the world, and Disney had the rights to put Roger in their theme parks. Disney-MGM Studios was going to get Roger Rabbit's Hollywood. This was going to have a Baby Herman roller coaster, a ride through Toontown on a new character named Gus the Bus, and a Benny the Cab ride, which was a prototype of Cartoon Spin. This would have all taken place at the end of Sunset Boulevard, where Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster stands now, which is going to be replaced with a Muppets roller coaster in the near future. Of course, this land never came to fruition, and the Roger Rabbit phenomenon in the parks faded almost as quickly as it rose. Not only was Roger Rabbit a commercial success and a big ticket in the theme parks, but it was critically lauded as well. The movie was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, and it won 4 of them. The victories came in Best Film Editing, Best Sound Effects Editing, Best Visual Effects, and a Special Achievement Award. It's not an exaggeration to say that Michael Eisner and Frank Wells were able to take the $300 million in profit and use it to fund the Disney Renaissance. Of course, a spike in admission prices to the theme parks, building new resort hotels on property, and selling VHS copies of Disney classics also helped in that department. The following year, Disney returned to the Princess well with The Little Mermaid, followed by Rescuers Down Under in 1990. The sequel to the original Rescuers movie was already in the works, but Disney Animation would follow that with Beauty and the Beast in 1991. Beauty and the Beast continued the critical success that the company received with Who Framed Roger Rabbit when it became the first animated movie to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture. You often hear Hollywood types say that just being nominated was the real honor. In the case of Beauty and the Beast, it was 100% true. That nomination solidified Disney animated movies as legitimate entertainment for children and for adults. 1992 saw Robin Williams take a role that was much better suited to his talents when he voiced the genie in Aladdin, and The Lion King raised things to a completely different level in 1994. The next 3 years saw a slight drop in the box office totals and the accolades, but Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Hercules all did respectable numbers and are flawed but enjoyable films. The Disney decade wrapped up with Mulan in 1998 and Tarzan in 1999. Phil Collins won the Academy Award for Best Original Song from Tarzan with You'll Be in My Heart. All the films together added up to almost $3.9 billion in box office receipts worldwide. Walt Disney liked to remind people that it was all started with a mouse, but the Disney Renaissance of Michael Eisner was all started with a rabbit. If you are looking for evidence of the Roger Rabbit phenomenon in Walt Disney World in Florida, there are a few places you can still look. If you're ever looking for a job as a cast member at WDW, there's a statue of Roger Rabbit in the casting building off of I-4 and near Disney Springs. Most of the other references can be found in Disney's Hollywood Studios, once known as Disney-MGM Studios. Roger's paw prints can be found in front of the Chinese Theater, which hosts Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. Over in Echo Lake, there's a maroon cartoon billboard featuring Baby Herman, Roger Rabbit, and Jessica Rabbit. Also in Echo Lake, above the entrance to the restaurant Hollywood and Vine, you can see a sign for Valiant and Valiant Detective Agency, and you see a Roger-shaped hole in the drapes. Roger also made an appearance in the 2022 live-action/animated hybrid Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, a fitting homage when considering the medium. There was some drama with the author of the book Who Censored Roger Rabbit. Gary K. Wolfe filed a lawsuit against the Walt Disney Company in 2001, looking for royalties he felt he was owed. He was awarded between $180,000 and $400,000 in damages. As the years have passed, Wolfe has seemed to come to terms with the hard feelings he had with Disney's adaptation of his work. He has written more books in the series and has even incorporated some of the canon from the movie into his works. When evaluating Eisner's tenure in charge of the company, it's important to consider successes like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and failures like Disney's America theme park in Northern Virginia. They were both great examples of Eisner pushing through doubt and obstacles to try and pull off a grand idea. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. With how risk-adverse Bob Iger has become in his time at the helm, especially in his second term, Eisner can look like the glory days. Still, the number of times that this project could have crashed and burned like Disney's America were plentiful. He caught lightning in a bottle with a hot director at the peak of his powers. He lucked out to have big-name actors miss out on the lead role for various different reasons. He had people working under him who refused to put in a half effort and wanted to, quote, bump the lamp. Christopher Lloyd needed to understand the assignment. Not to mention he was lucky enough to hand the baton to The Little Mermaid, a movie that also caught lightning in a bottle by finding a young Jodie Benson to voice Ariel. Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and Lion King were all good movies. They built quality on top of quality for a solid 10-year period. For a while, they said that Eisner had the Midas touch, meaning that everything he touched turned to gold. Well, sometimes he was just dealing with a product that was gold from the very start. This has been episode 203 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. I will be back next Thursday with another brand new episode of the show. I'll be talking with a woman who decided that she was going to sell her home and travel the US, Canada, and Mexico in an RV. She's going to talk about some of her adventures and some of her tips for staying safe as a solo female traveler. Tuesday is Christmas Eve, and I was honored to be asked to be a guest on the Stride Sisters podcast. My conversation with Natalie and Hannah will air on Tuesday. We'll focus mostly on the holiday decorations and offerings at Walt Disney World, but we'll also sneak in some Run Disney conversation. I consider Natalie to be a friend, and I was so excited that she decided to start up a podcast with some of her running friends. Give it a listen. Once again, it is the Stride Sisters podcast, and I will be on Tuesday. Before I let you go, last month was a pretty big milestone for me. Yes, I talked about the 200th episode of the show, but there was also a more upsetting reason that the month was significant. In November of 2014, I visited my father's side of the family for Thanksgiving. My father was killed in 1999, so I had been specifically putting out the effort for 15 years to try and stay in touch with that side of the family. Needless to say, they did something pretty awful to the point that I had to cut off my relationship with them. I found out that my grandmother had passed a few years ago, and it is never easy to lose family. Whether it's by death or by trying to take care of your own health, the sense of loss is palpable. Hitting the 10-year mark of that traumatic experience And then hearing all of the stories of people who had to separate themselves from toxic family members due to recent events has been eye-opening. I want to let everyone out there know that it gets better. It gets easier to deal with the loss of the relationship you thought you had because you will find more supportive people in your lives. You don't owe anybody your time, attention, or love except for your children. This isn't to say that you should just pick fights over small differences. I swear, your older uncle may not be able to accept the designated hitter rule, but as long as he accepts his trans niece, that's all that matters. We all deserve to feel a sense of peace over the holidays, and there is nothing worse than not feeling safe around the people who are supposed to love you the most. If this holiday is tough and you have nowhere to turn, I want you to know that those of us who put on this show care about you. There's a community out there for you somewhere. People will love you, and you deserve that. Have a great holiday, no matter what you're celebrating. Talk to you next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.